It's time to answer some more comments. I just got out of a church service a few minutes ago, and there was a young lady that was baptized into Christ, so that was great to see. But it's time for us to answer some more comments. It looks like I've got 12 here that have not been answered. Basically, I come in every 2 or 3 days or so and get caught up. And I may even offline do uh, type in some answers too, but it's not something I get to every day. But I got some time tonight to do that. By the way, non life doesn't give birth to life. Why evolution is a fairy tale for grown-ups. You should probably check that video out. I haven't seen it yet, but it is we've talked about that already on this channel, so you don't even need the video because I've already told you why that's a fairy tale. But we will go ahead and get into some comments. Okay, somebody has a comment here from like, has the game really changed videos? So let me just go to YouTube Studio and find. I just put out a Monetization Monday video, but we are looking at comments. And so, thank you. Nice recap. No problem. Okay, and so then there are excusists. Okay, so why does the Bible get the order of creation wrong? Okay, what does the Bible get wrong about the order of creation? Because, by the way, since no one is there when creation occurred, and honestly, the scientists have just figured out that there was a beginning to the universe not all that long ago. There were still a bunch of people believing that it was potentially infinite, went back, and that there was no beginning to the universe. And so, with Big Bang, and people now have accepted Big Bang because the evidence shows that there was a beginning to the universe. Now, people kind of act like all the atheists didn't have this universe being eternal being a possibility in the past. And so there's just a statement made. Why does the Bible get the order of creation wrong? What does the Bible get wrong about the order of creation? Exactly. And once you say that, then you now have the burden of proof, because again, we're talking about an account from the person who was there. Of course, you don't believe that that's from the person who was there, but what we're saying is this is from the person who was there doing it, and you are now saying you know what happened at the beginning. How exactly? So what does the Bible get wrong about the order of creation? Exactly, would be the question. And then you have people that jump in and say they're going to answer your question, but to expect them to make assumptions not in Genesis. Expect them to make assumptions from Genesis, I think is what the person means. Make up science and logically contort themselves in a way that will make you pity them. Well, okay. Maybe that is what happens, that there is pity there. But one of the things we've continually said, we have this term BAE now, Big Bang, abiogenesis, evolution. That is something that we are looking at and saying, hey, if you believe in BAE, Big Bang, abiogenesis, evolution, that is something that I look at and say, hey, that opposes the science. So if that's what you want to believe, you have every right to. It's a free country. Well, we're in America here. There may be people that are not in America, but it's a free country. Believe what you like, but that's what you're going to have to. That's what you have the option of, and so you have to deny science and deny laws of science and deny the concept of design in order to come up with that. Um, so yeah, so I know that all too well. That's why they are also known as excusists. Anything to protect their deeply held beliefs. And so, yeah, that's what often people do that believe in evolution and these kinds of things. That you don't want there to be a God, and so you do anything to protect your beliefs. And so often these things that let's say I'm being accused of, where I'm looking at theism and atheism, and the atheist is only looking at atheism, and then saying that they're looking at theism or looking at the Bible, but not really, because again, there is going to be. Um, so when you say, "Why does the Bible get the order of creation wrong?" Hey, point out what's wrong about it, and then what you have to do is then say, "This is why it had to have happened this other way." But again, you're going to have to make assumptions, right? You're going to make assumptions that are not in Genesis, and what we're talking about is not science because you can't know what happened thousands of years ago based on science. You can't know how it all came into existence because what we're talking about is something that would have been supernatural. If you believe Big Bang, that's supernatural. If you believe abiogenesis, life arising from non life, if you believe evolution, these are all supernatural things. They are not things that we actually observe. You do not observe uh, one type of organism turning into another. Dogs give birth to dogs. Plants, a certain type of plant gives rise to another type of plant. We've already talked about this before. So if you believe in Bay, all of that stuff is supernatural. If you believe in God, in terms of the origins of things, we're talking about something that's supernatural. Okay. So, are you trying to disprove evolution or prove Christianity? Just because a person isn't a Christian doesn't mean they believe in evolution. Evolution lives in Christians' heads rent free. Okay, I'm not so well, so the issue here is that when I'm talking about creation, the what comes up, because that's what the original video was about, creation. So this person who is making this comment is the original video was about creation, and then all of the backlash from the video was people essentially saying that creation didn't happen, and that's when evolution inevitably comes up. Uh, um, so I don't know if this person, uh, I don't know if this person saw the original video, uh, but I was talking about um, creation. It was people in the comments, honestly, who people in the comments opposed to creation. That's where evolution comes out, right? It has to. So the reason why we have to talk about it so much is because it's like drilled into people's heads, and as soon as you say creation, then people completely go into talking about evolution like it's the natural thing. So I don't know if this person saw the original video, but I was talking about creation there. But people in the comments, uh, but many of the comments on the video. So just because a person isn't a Christian doesn't mean they believe in evolution. So this is, but I was so this is a good. So what does someone believe? How do you believe the world came to be if you don't believe in an evolutionary perspective? This is a um, thanks for the comment. Um, my gen so my basically my general I've generally found that most people do. So when there are comments um, against my view of creation, they are generally based on evolution. Are you saying that you don't believe in evolution? because that's actually a good start for, because it's so ingrained in people that there is that as soon as you say you don't believe in evolution, so this idea of evolution living in Christians' heads rent free is no, like it is the thing that people most often bring up so quickly. So you have to know about it, because otherwise people will just say, well, don't you believe in evolution? And because of evolution, and this is what atheists say, by the way. So I'm not sure if this person is familiar with Richard Dawkins and people like that. But one of the things Richard Dawkins has said is that evolution, it allows him to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. And so the idea there is that Dawkins believes that he has a good reason to believe that there is no God because of evolution. And so, as a Christian, when there are people that oppose me in the comments, and that, like, you come in the comments and you're saying things, what happens is, um, when I have atheists that are saying things to me in the comments, they are generally appealing to some type of evolutionary perspective or worldview. And it's like, if you don't already believe that worldview, then to them you are not educated, or you're not smart, or you're not in your right mind. That these are the kinds of things that get said. And so therefore, when I'm constantly saying, hey, the initial video is about creation, but when I talk about creation and then people immediately kind of oppose that, and then you have people, for example, saying that the Bible gets the order of creation wrong, what they're going to then appeal to is some kind of evolutionary framework, right? And so again, when you think about the purpose of that, it is for the atheist a way to be intellectually fulfilled, because prior to that, people would just be like, "What? How? How did everything get here then?" And before something like evolution that sounds like it could be scientific, but one of the things we point out is that it's not. Before that, you didn't really have a great answer for the theist who says to you, okay, how do you come up with this? And so now evolution has taken on this, uh, taken a very big place among atheists, because if you tear that down, if you tear down Big Bang, then the question is, what do you have to stand on now? So I'm curious about this person, because if they don't, uh, or if they're not a Christian, or they do not believe in the Bible, um, but maybe they might be religious in some other way. So I don't know, but so for example, they might be Hindu, or they might be a pantheist or a deist or something like that. So I don't know. So that's true. So my thought is, generally the most non Christians um, believe in evolution, um, but of course that's not everybody. When there are comments against my view of creation, they are generally based on evolution. Are you saying that you aren't a Christian? You also don't believe in evolution. So that would be cool, because I think that is a growing number of people that are seeing, hey, so this person is saying, hey, you're just harping on evolution all the time. And this person is essentially saying, I don't even believe in that either. So why do you have to beat that dead horse? I mean, I agree that it's a dead horse, but for many people, they're trying to revive it. They're trying to keep it alive. And what we're saying is, and there's a reason for that. But that's what this person would say. Hey, you just have this book, this evolution boogeyman in your head. But it's like, no, people bring it up all the time. I will assure you. So it would be interesting to know about that. Um, I don't. So Jerry doesn't do critical thinking. Genesis is an ancient fairy tale written by Hebrew priests to include their Hebrew God Yahweh. That's an assertion that people have. And so the thing about it is, it's one of those things where it's like, you don't do critical thinking because he, and so then call it a fairy tale. And so once again we go back to, um, are you a theist? Or do you understand that there is a God that created the universe? Um, because if there is not that, then there really is no, we don't have anything to talk about when it comes to the scriptures. Because if you don't understand that there's a God, then how can we even be able to discuss the scriptures because you're still going to go back to, well, there's no God anyway, right? So then we just keep going in these circles. And so again, but there are going to be people that come in and say that, and so I've got to go back in the Ethelred, Hardred part. It's like when someone says, I don't do critical thinking. And so it's like, wow, okay, I don't do critical thinking. So you have to kind of say, well, of course I do, but the, how it is, if someone disagrees with you, that's, it's much easier to attack me and then stick with the thing you believe, which is Genesis is an ancient fairy tale rewritten by Hebrew priests to include their Hebrew God Yahweh. So I think in this case, the person is saying that it's an ancient creation story, just like all the other ones, basically. And the Hebrews took it and put their God in there rather than something else. And so there are other ancient fairy tales, and it's just like those. Well, that's, again, that's not true, but I mean, you can say it, and that makes you feel better about ignoring the book of Genesis and ignoring, uh, for example, the order of creation that the person talked about earlier. And so we can dig more deeply into that. I actually have an interesting podcast guest that has written a book recently called Three Proofs of God. I think he gets into some of the some of the evidence for the Bible being inspired by God. So that'll be an interesting podcast. It's not coming out for another probably week and a half or so, but that's coming. So we are coming with more content regarding the inspiration of the Bible, if you're up to it, rather than just simply going with ad hominem. So ad hominem again is you attack the person and you say this person doesn't do critical thinking. So because they don't agree with the thing that you agree with. And so, if you're talking about a fairy tale, the problem that you have when you call these books in scripture fairy tales is that you actually have real locations, you have real uh, people in history, people historically that we're looking at here. And so, and again, the book of Genesis goes all the way back to the beginning. And it, again, of course, it mentions the great flood. People don't like to talk about the flood either. But when the Bible in general is rooted in history, and this is something that's unlike fairy tales. And so I was listening to someone talk about this today, where people try to equate the Bible accounts to something like Superman or something like Lord of the Rings or something like that, where these are clearly fantasy stories that have no root in actual history at all. But when you look at, so for example, this is true when you get to the New Testament specifically. You look at the book of Acts, you look at the book of Luke, and the way Luke writes, you have things that would you could have gone back and corroborated, details that you can go to, whether it's geographical details, where Luke will say, well, they went up to this place or went down to this place, or they were on the sea, and there are these different seafaring uh, nouns and verbs that Luke is using, these technical terms that show that this is really how people used boats back then. And so there's all of this history that's there in the scripture. It's not a fairy tale. It doesn't read like a fairy tale. And so what you're having to do here is just call it a fairy tale, and then it's much easier to dismiss. So call it a fairy tale, say I'm not a critical thinker, and then now you're fine with going on about your life and about your business. And so I'm just curious about why, if I'm not a critical thinker, why are you, once you've figured out that I'm not a critical thinker, again, there's not anything you can point to that say that I'm not thinking critically, by the way. You're just saying stuff. So what you can do is you can say, hey, he had this logic that is faulty logic, so that therefore he's not a critical thinker. No, all you do is just make that claim. And so I'll just tell you, look, again, just because I have these degrees doesn't mean anything. So I don't throw out the degrees simply to try to dunk on somebody or anything. I don't actually care that much about the degrees, except to be able to show, look, they don't hand out PhDs to someone who can't do critical thinking. and again, in mechanical engineering. So you can say these kinds of things, but again, maybe they did. Maybe they just handed out the degree. I can assure you they did not. I can assure you it was not easy. And so I can assure you that what we learn in engineering is how to think about things step by step. And that's a lot of the approach that I take to these things. And what happens is when I take that approach, it causes people to get somewhat riled up. And so I understand that that's the case. But what I would say to you is this is not a matter of me not thinking critically. Just because you disagree doesn't mean, and again, I don't say that anybody here is not thinking critically, but just because you disagree, you're now saying, oh, I just don't think critically. Now I could show, we look at, again, the evolutionary story is a fairy tale. We're really saying, well, these things that we needed to happen just happened, and they happened from mutations, something we don't see in science. So, and that this apparently continues to happen today, even though we can't actually show it. All we can show are small adaptations, and so we extrapolate out to these big ones that for which there is no evidence. And so that this is what we have, and so that is the video said that its evolution is uh, fairy tales for grown-ups. Now this person says, well, evolution is living in your head. It's not really, but it's the thing that people keep bringing up. So um, Ethel Hardred, you are denying real evidence. I again, I'll has that was from a couple of days prior to this. Um, I don't do critical thinking apparently. Um, Genesis is an ancient fairy tale rewritten by Hebrew priests to include their Hebrew God Yahweh. It's difficult to even know how to respond to a claim like that because you just say it, right? And so my response generally is, have you read the book of Genesis? Because it's not, you might say, hey, Genesis 1 and 2 is that, but Genesis has 50 chapters. So if we're looking at the accounts in Genesis, also the stories of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, those are all fairy tales as well. Like, that's an ancient fairy tale that's rewritten by Hebrew priests to include Yahweh. Well, that's where it begins to get fuzzy for you because again, but if you're saying, oh, Genesis 1 and 2 is that, uh, I Genesis just doesn't read like a fairy tale to me. I Have you read it? That's generally my go-to is like, have you read it? It just doesn't read like a fairy tale. And if you've read it, then we have a place where we can go, and the person might say, "Oh, I have read it, and so therefore that's why I can say these things about it." Okay, my computer's lagging a little bit. Let me make my head smaller here. All right, so I need to now this Ethel Hardred person. I need to kind of go to that video because this person is like timestamp, timestamp, timestamp. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. So let me go. Let me go to this. So this is the very first comments video. And now I'm down to one notification. So this is the first comment video. So then this is the person that's like, still no timestamp. I must assume then that even you know that you don't have anything resembling verifiable evidence. I don't know what you're talking about here. Um, so let's see. How about you take a geology class at real college and learn about the real age of the earth? You earn your living with long videos. Okay, so where is any evidence in this video? You want me watch it, tell me where the evidence is, timestamp please. I just don't know what you're talking about here. Um um how about you take a geology class at a real college and learn about the real age of the earth? Um again, I'm not a full-time content creator. I do this every 2 or 3 days. I'll get on here and do a video. And the reason why the video is an hour, hour and a half, because I'm actually trying to respond to this stuff and wanting to do so in a way that is pretty complete. But again, many of these things are ad hominem, and I'm not doing a great job of always responding because when someone tells you that you don't think critically or that you must be out of your mind, it's not the easiest thing to do to just realize that it's just someone lashing out, right? It's not easy to separate that they're actually angry at God in many cases. So, um, this idea of taking a geology class at real college, as if again, I've been at 3 different universities. I have 2 bachelor's degrees, a master's degree, and a PhD in mechanical engineering. So I've been at real colleges, real universities. I can assure you. And this idea of needing to go to a geology class, here's my issue with the geology class, and this gets back to one of the things that we've talked about when it comes to the Great Flood. It really all comes down to your assumptions. And so when you look at the evidence for a great flood all over the world, and none of that's in your geology class, then what are we to do with that? And I don't. And so you say, where's the evidence? Again, we've talked about this a little bit, but I think you're talking about evidence for an old Earth. So, or for you're talking about an evidence. You're saying I need to show you evidence for an Earth that's more like thousands rather than billions of years old. And so we actually talk about that in another video, and I will go ahead and link you to that video with Dr. Don DeYoung that we had earlier. But this idea of like we actually have done a video about the Earth being thousands rather than billions of years old. So let me find that video from a few weeks back. And that is, let's see, here. Dr. Don is here. So this is that link. And so one of my previous podcasts was with Dr. Don DeYoung, and we discussed evidence for a young Earth on the order of thousands rather than billions of years old. Okay. So my thing is, I don't even, when I think about this stuff, this was all based on a video that I had done farther back. Or again, this was based on my podcast from last week. So that's where this was. So again, what I would say about specifically about taking the geology class, by the way, again, is taking the geology class, if it's coming from a perspective of ignoring this other evidence, then what good would that be exactly? Because all it's going to do is come from that perspective. Same thing with taking a biology class that's talking about evolution. We've already saw in one of the comments tonight that someone was saying, hey, essentially, I think this person would have to correct me, but they seem to be saying, I'm not a Christian and I don't believe in evolution either. So again, I think that's a growing number of people that when you start looking at the evidence, you start seeing there's some real problems here. And so someone could say, well, just take a real biology class, but this isn't about biology. What we're essentially talking about is more philosophical, actually. And so, me with an engineering background, I can't keep looking at what we see in nature and the design in it and let people who don't do design tell me that it's not design. That they can try to do that, but that's not your training to know what it looks like to see a system of systems where these different subsystems work together. Each subsystem is composed of various components that are working together to create a system that works. That is evidence of purpose. That is evidence of design. And we see that. And the atheistic answer to this, because I don't want to say scientific because that's not science to say that. And this brings me to this other comment where science literally began with living in a land that did allow believers, that did allow non-believers. So you started badly while quoting me. Timestamps as you wasted beginning and irrelevancy. Did you know that the first science paper was from a Muslim, or that Newton did not believe in the Trinity or an afterlife? Um, I'm maybe someone else can help me understand that. I don't understand exactly what this person is saying, but um, the idea that the first science paper was from a Muslim, let's say, even if that were true, now again, we're talking about modern science. So you might go back and say, hey, there was some science done by someone who was a Muslim. But by all accounts, when we look at the rise of modern science, we're not talking about did someone write a paper that could be considered science or considered scientific. Did people in thousands of years ago do science? Well, yes, in a way, but we're talking about the modern sense of science. Began with believers. Began from what people would call a Judeo-Christian heritage. There is no doubt. So the idea of science literally began. Yeah, I don't know what that means. Science literally began with living in a land that did allow non-believers. I don't know what that means, but I because again, if you're saying that the land had believers and non-believers were allowed there, then again, science would have been started by people who were believers. So I don't know exactly what to do with that. So I honestly would just say question mark. Well, what I would say is when you say the first science paper was from a Muslim, I mean, we're not calling that the we're not calling that the beginning of modern science, that person. But if let's say we were to concede that the Muslim is someone who is a theist, so the atheistic association with science that has happened over the last few decades roughly is a very new thing, but modern science itself has theistic underpinnings. It came from a Judeo-Christian background. And so when you look at someone like Newton, so talking about Newton not believing in the Trinity or an afterlife, did he believe in Jesus Christ? Right? Was he a believer in the Bible? So you could potentially talk about, like, I'm not here to litigate whether Newton was truly a Christian or not. I'm really not, but that is really irrelevant to the basic. It's not even a claim. Like you go talk to historians of science, they will tell you modern science came from believers. And even if you want to say, well, it really started with someone who was Muslim, okay, this person would have been a theist. But what we do know is that it certainly didn't start from an atheistic um, background, even though there is this current association in our culture with atheists with science. That association is there, but one of the things we are arguing is first, there are many theists in science. And just because we as theists are there, it's not that we don't have critical thinking skills. It's not anything like that. It is that some people have successfully been able to associate atheism with science, even though it began from theism, it began from Christianity. So you can later on make this association if you want to. It still doesn't take away where that came from. So that is where it came from. And so this wouldn't really address that. And so again, I honestly don't know what you're talking about with timestamps. And so I would just be like question mark there. I don't know what you're talking about. And then um it seems like they're agreeing with me because they're saying living in a land that did allow non-believers. So it seems like they're agreeing, but I don't. The person that just keeps saying timestamp. And here's the other thing I do want to say here. It looks like we're getting through this a little bit faster than I thought, which is good. I do want to say, if you're watching these videos and you're liking this stuff and and you agree with me on a lot of these things, I'm not saying you need to get in the comments more. That's fine. You might be amused or entertained by me responding to people who are uh, very hostile in the comments. But again, you, by all means, if you do have positive things to say, I would certainly welcome that as well. So as far as the notifications are, um, this is let's see. Okay, so this person just responded again. So we're like actually responding in real time. The Bible says the earth existed before the sun, when in reality the sun existed before the earth. Why does the Bible get it wrong? How do you know the sun existed before the earth? Right? So what assumptions do you make to say that the sun existed before the earth? What assumptions are necessary there? So what happens is you're making assumptions that require um, that will lead you to a certain conclusion. So, what assumptions are you making to say that? And so, what we're doing here is saying, yes, um, the Bible says in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, the sun. God made the sun on the fourth day of creation, right? And so again, they both are created so close together. The idea of there being like some kind of noticeable difference that you can tell between the age of the earth and the age of the sun, how would you be able to do such a thing? They're 4 days apart. Now you're going to say, well, you just believe they're 4 days apart because that book says it. And that's true. But the thing about it is, I believe the book because I've examined the book. And that's the thing we're going to go back to, that I do believe the book. And what are you basing that statement on? So when you say, as a matter of fact, you like, how would you know that the sun existed before the earth? What assumptions are necessary? Or yeah, what assumptions, we could just go back to what we had. What assumptions are needed to make such a statement? So, like, this is the thing I want people to try to examine, because what happens is you just say it. You just say that the sun existed before the earth. Well, what assumptions are we making here? And if you say, well, okay, what assumptions are needed to make such a statement? Because there are assumptions needed. And if you say there aren't any, then we start getting into where we have problems. And so my thing is, when we're making these statements of however old you're saying the earth is, or however old you're saying the sun is, there are assumptions being made. So what assumptions are made? What assumptions are you making there? So when you say, how do you date? So how do you know the sun exists before the earth? Um, let's just, because sometimes if you ask two different questions, so again, I'm doing this in real time. Like, what assumptions are being made to date the beginning of the sun and the earth? Right. So that would be the question we're asking here, because you're assuming that, okay, by observing this, we can know how long this thing has been here. So we would know that how becomes the question. And so you're you're making these assumptions. What assumptions are you using to date the beginnings of the earth and the sun? Because if you just say, when in reality, you say that it's in reality, but it's not reality, it's an estimate. It's some kind of some it's not in reality. Well, that's the thing. Why does the Bible doesn't get it wrong? What do you mean? So you say in reality when what you mean is that using that some people have estimated that the sun is a certain age and that the earth is more recent. What assumptions are you using? Let me say, but I think you mean. So the Bible doesn't get it wrong. Let's start there. And because people have said the Bible get stuff wrong, and they say that all the time, and it's just not accurate. And people have tried. People would love to get for the Bible to get it wrong. And so here we go. Here's one of those things that's wrong. The Bible doesn't get it wrong. You say in reality, but it would be more accurate. It would be accurate. It would actually be accurate, because it's not more accurate. It would actually be accurate to say that some people have estimated. Grammarly says I should just say it would be accurate to say that some people have estimated that the sun is a certain age and that the earth is more recent. What assumptions are you using to date the beginnings of the earth and the sun? That's a pretty good comeback. Because again, so I want you to see in real time how we're thinking about this and whether I'm thinking critically or not, right? Can I think in real time, as people have said? And now, again, expect them to make assumptions. What I want everyone to understand is that everyone makes assumptions. So let's make all of our assumptions clear rather than just going with whatever assumptions are out there. And so here's what I'll do is that's all I see on this one. And let me go back to my other comment video and see if there was anything there. So, because I'm sure like this person gets notifications, so they're like coming straight back. So I'm not going to try to be on here for like an hour and a half or anything, but it'll be fun to kind of go back and forth like in real time with this. So let me go to, because I was responding to someone, yeah, here. This has like 68 comments on it, which is crazy to me. And so I was responding to Christian Ice previously. And so I would be, we can make me a little bit bigger again. And so so just to kind of go back, Christian Ice was someone who's been commenting, and he was saying that he had read the Bible cover to cover, and he just didn't view the God of the Bible positively. He had some negative things to say about him, and so we were getting into a couple of interesting discussions last week, and so I'm going to see if that is if he's said anything since then, because we were kind of going back and forth offline. I wasn't in the middle of a video or anything, but we're gonna like look this up. So he had said this was just invented by people, um, and I think I was saying something about you've read the Bible, and he said that God was an egomaniac, genocidal, ultra conservative, and he said another word too. I didn't know what that word meant until I looked it up, so I'm not going to say it, but it is there. Um, and so then there's this other person that was jumping in. Like I believe that you don't mean to be offensive from a purely rational perspective. What is your problem with egomania, genocide, and being ultra conservative? By the way, I don't agree that God is any of those things, but I was just simply saying, hey, like there's this judgment that you're making with God. Where does this come from? Because if you're saying, hey, I reject that, I'm atheistic, his answer is my subjective morality. And so that is that's generally what I would say. Look, he's saying subjective morality. And so the idea of subjective morality is is convenient. And so what I would say, I there would be no other, because there's no place to go from there. I could try to tell Christian Ice, you shouldn't be, you should want an objective morality. You should want to have a morality that is transcendent, rather than a morality that's based on you. But people like to have a morality that's based on them, and frankly, that morality is borrowed from God, because because we know God, we know that being an egomaniac is wrong. It's because we know God that we know that being genocidal is wrong. Now, ultra conservative, I mean, I don't know what that means. And again, the idea of God being ultra conservative, I don't even, it's not clear to me what that means. But for some people, conservative is a curse word, I guess. And so that is, that's what's there. And so I honestly don't think he was trying to be offensive. That this is his judgment. But again, that judgment is a subjective morality. So there's really not any place to go from there, because if it's your subjective morality, then that's what you think. And but again, from my perspective, I don't know why anyone else should think that's a bad thing. So some people might think that's a good thing. Again, those things aren't good things, and God is not any of those things. But if you claim that, my question is just, okay, where does that morality come from? And then when we look at people who did things according to their subjective morality, like Hitler, like Stalin, like Pol Pot, like we can go down the line, people that killed a bunch of people, they acted based on their subjective morality. And there's a sense in all of us that that is wrong. And the question is, where does that come from? And so it's not good enough when someone says, well, he was just acting on his subjective morality. We all have a sense that there's more than that subjective morality, that there is something objective. But if you believe in an objective morality, now you have to believe in a transcendent one who establishes those objective morals. And so, if you don't want to believe in uh, objective morality, then that's kind of where that ends. It's just interesting that the person calls themselves Christian. I don't. Maybe his name is Christian or something, which would be ironic if maybe they at one time believed in Christ, but now they don't. So this one was more about. This one was more about the. This person was asking about. Um, this person was saying that I can see a deistic or pantheistic God, but I haven't really heard anything that could get me to a theistic God. And I thought that was interesting. And I asked the question there, is that about a God being less appealing, or is it about God actually being less likely? Because sometimes I think people can conflate the two. I don't like the God of the Old Testament, therefore I don't want him to exist. and he's less likely to exist. But not liking someone is not the same as them actually existing or not. And we've talked about how those are not the same thing. I don't think he ever really answered back. And so this is where Ethelred Hardred comes in. Okay, because I'm like, where I've seen that name, but I hadn't. Okay, and so then there are a bunch of statements made about how there's no flood. Which again, if someone asks, well, why are you talking about the flood so much? It's because people bring it up, and often I'm not necessarily bringing it up all the time, but yes, there's a great flood, and when you affirm that, there are people that come out and say, no, there wasn't. And so the question is, why does that matter? Well, it matters greatly because your view of geology will completely change if you understand that there was a great flood versus not understanding that. And so your understanding of a lot of what you're being told about the age of the earth based on geology changes when you understand a global flood occurred a few thousand years ago. So this is we talked to Boots Scanchelsis. How do you explain the apparent design in the human body? The person says here it isn't designed apparently. That's just a baseless assertion by creationists. Okay, that is. I mean, even atheists observe that there's apparent design in the human body. I so that is a wow. And so, I mean, you can it's must be make you feel better, I would think, to say that it isn't apparent that it's designed. And so I'm telling you, as someone trained in engineering design, that it is apparent. And I'm saying that even atheists admit that it's apparent. If you've ever heard people talk about the human body and say things like, we are hardwired to do X, Y, and Z, when you say, well, we're designed to, well, the heart is designed to do this, you can't really talk about it without talking about that there are purposes for various parts of the human body. If there are purposes for them, then that's apparent design. And what you have to do is try to explain, okay, what do we do? How do we explain that it's apparently designed? And you can explain that, but you can just simply deny it and then say that's only creationists that say it. But it's actually not true that there are just creationists say it. Even evolutionists said, and I've quoted from Dr. Jerry Coyne's book, Why Evolution is True. And the beginning of one of his chapters, he says, yeah, like it looks designed. And so it does look designed. Everybody says it looks, I thought everybody did, but Boots Canchelsis does not say it looks designed. And what you have to then do is just completely ignore the human body. And what you then have to do is look at, because then my question, honestly, to Boots Canchelsis is, do we design things as humans? If we design things as humans, then it's actually a very simple way to show that we have been designed. And the way you would show that is simply to show, and this would be philosophically, this argument is what would be called a fortiori. And that just means you're arguing from the stronger. I guess in this case, it wouldn't be a fortiori. It would be something else. Well, it would be, but it would be slightly different. I'm not a philosophy major or anything. My point is the idea of showing you what design is, or if something has been designed, is actually very simple. Because when we talk about design, we're talking about something that's built and with a purpose behind it. Okay, so if I look at something that has been designed, let's say a 10-year-old puts together some type of car or Lego set or something like that. So if I look at that Lego set and I can see that someone put that together in an organized way, it was designed. Excuse me. Then I look at, let's say, a Lamborghini. I look at that Lamborghini that's far more complex and intricate than that Lego car. And I argue that if the Lego car has been designed, then the thing that is more complex, more intricate must have been designed also. So you're arguing from the lesser thing to the greater thing. And so the problem you have, Boots Can Chelsea's, is that when we look at the human body, there are all kinds of things that we design as humans that pale in comparison to the things we see in the human body. So if you want to talk about the cell, if you want to talk about DNA, if you want to talk about various components of the human body, if you want to talk about subsystems, if you want to talk about systems in the human body, and then you look at the entire human body systems, it's a system of systems, is what we call it in engineering. The problem you have is that we design things that are systems of systems, that are very intricate, that are clearly designed. We put thought into it, and none of them are on the level of the human body. In fact, we create humanoid robots. Part of my work as a robotics engineer is I work with humanoid robots. Right now, we're working on some computer vision stuff. We want to get it to be able to see and recognize objects and be able to tell the distance and be able to move towards that. And that's what I work on. So you have to design that. And yet, what we see in the human body far exceeds the things that we are saying are designed. Now, the problem is, if you say that the human body wasn't designed, then what are we saying about these lesser things? What are we saying about these other things that we know are designed? Well, then what you have to try to do is maybe create some kind of dysteleological argument and say that it was badly designed. The human body wasn't badly designed. I think this is what we come to next, where Christian Ice talks about who in his right mind, speaking of God, would design a body that uses the same tube to breathe and to feed. 150,000 persons die every year because of choking. How's that good designed? And my answer to that is, okay, like my background's in engineering design. So now you're talking about my background. And so I say, hey, look, have you built something that needed to both breathe and feed so that you can make a judgment? Because you're making these judgments about what God has done. And so if you haven't, because you haven't, then you're judging a design that you can't improve on. So from an engineering perspective, every design feature, every design decision requires you to have trade-offs. There are pros and cons, there are advantages and disadvantages. And so if you have no training in design, you can simply say, hey, a different design could result in fewer deaths. But what are the trade-offs for having multiple tubes for breathing and feeding, for example? What you haven't considered is that a multiple tube or other design alternative might result in more deaths. Without that kind of information about trade-offs, you can't make an informed judgment about how good a design is. My proposition is that having two different tubes for the two separate functions would be beneficial. I mean, you can make that proposition, right? But you can make it, but you're now saying something like a whale and a dolphin that is underwater, because it has multiple tubes, so humans should have that as well. But we're talking about something in a completely different environment. Like, do you see how? So I hope you can see that that proposition sounds good, but practically, you're talking about something in a different environment. And so just because 150,000 people choke every year, that's tragic. But to say that it's because of the way God designed the throat is putting a judgment that you have no way of saying one way or the other. And let's say that you do have two different tubes. Could there be other types of deaths? And the answer is, of course, there could. And there's no way for you to know the difference. So you can make these propositions and say, I think it would be better. But that's all it is. It's a proposition. As some people have pointed out, it would be an assertion. I don't mind people making assertions. I don't mind people making assumptions because that's what we all do. But understand that that's not something that I can hang my hat on and that I can say, well, therefore God didn't do this. So the one so you use so your examples are water creatures that live in water rather than on land. Like, so you understand, right? Like you understand how you have to use that example of something that lives in water. Do you like I hope Christian Ice is beginning to kind of see, hey, wait a minute. Like, I have to go to what whales and dolphins and say maybe we should be more like whales and dolphins. And it's like I, that's what you have to go to hold on to this idea that no, this isn't good design. The human body is not well designed. Of course it's well designed. And so what you have to hang your hat on are these attacks on the human body. And once again, you have no way of knowing whether or not whether or not your proposition would result in more deaths. There's no way for you to test it. It's not testable. So I understand your proposition, but like it's not testable. Two things here. One, your proposition isn't testable. So you can say it would be better if we had two different tubes. You could say that, but the what would be the drawbacks for your design? Two, your examples are creatures that live in water in a different environment. Like, so this is what again, by the way, those maybe for those who think I don't, again, can't think critically or whatever, please, like, please look at this. Maybe you still don't think this is thinking critically, but it really is, like, because he has a valid point to say that, again, the dysteleological argument is in some ways something that you can try to come back with, but the problem with it is it's so judgmental and it's so unappreciative of the design here. And that's why, like, I have to come to you as an engineer and say, look, you're really thinking you're going to do better. And my thing is, if you're so good at engineering design, come on, we're looking for more engineers out here. So if you know how to, but it's not enough to just say you have an idea. You actually have to be able to execute. You actually have to be able to test. And you can't just say you have this idea and it would be better. And I propose this. Well, people are proposing things all the time. That doesn't work. You have to actually execute here. So your proposition isn't testable. But for the sake of argument, what would be the drawbacks for your design? What are the drawbacks of your design? These are the kinds of questions engineers have to ask. And what I'm saying is, it's not enough to make propositions. And so let's just do it like this. Two things. Your proposition isn't testable, but for the sake of argument, think about this. What are the drawbacks of your design? You don't get to, like, if you're going to have your proposition isn't testable, as was stated earlier before, your design could result in more deaths. perhaps for a different reason. So maybe so in the case of this, you could potentially have fewer choking deaths, but more deaths of a different type. You see, like this is the thing I'm saying. This is what when you're talking about failure mode analysis and that kind of thing that we learn about in engineering school, right? There are plenty of ways for things to fail, and so when something works, what happens is people look at the few failures and they look at the few failures and then say, well, there should be zero failures. And that would be nice if there were zero failures. But the problem is, like if you take any product, the problem is people don't use your product right. So you can make a really great product and people won't use it properly and it fails. And people will then say your product is trash. It's like, no, the product isn't trash. You didn't read the manual. You didn't use it the way it was supposed to be used. And so in the case of something like this, okay, if you split the tubes into breathing and feeding tubes separately, that design could result in more deaths. Right? Like as an engineer, I understand you thinking, oh, well, this would solve it. The idea that you could just come up with something, oh, then that would solve it. No. First of all, you just can't test it. But second of all, you could end up actually having more deaths because now there's some new problem that gets introduced. But for the sake of argument, think about this. What are the drawbacks of your design? Secondly, your examples are creatures that live in a different environment. So water rather than land. So it's just not comparable. You're talking about a that again, yeah. Comparing whales and dolphins to humans doesn't work here. Comparing whales and dolphins to humans doesn't work here. So, two things to think about here. Your proposition isn't testable. As was stated before, your design could result in more deaths, perhaps for a different reason you haven't considered. But for the sake of argument, think about it. Think about this. What are the drawbacks of your design? If you say, well, there are no drawbacks, then you're not ready for engineering design yet, because every design has them. And if you can't quantify them to say, well, my drawbacks would be less than that one's drawbacks, well, again, you can't do that. So your examples are creatures that live in a different environment, water rather than land. So comparing whales and dolphins to humans doesn't work here. But like I appreciate the thought process. Like this is good. You got to work through the thought process. But when you start working through it, you start finding, hey. And then my man here, creationists aren't the only people that observe the apparent design in the human body. So saying that the body isn't designed is a baseless assertion. Like, let me see if my typing worked. Oh, I said a certain assertion. Right? Because what you're going to have to do is, because what you now need to do is take things like cells and DNAs and all the systems and the components of the human body and show how these things that have purposes to them, they work a certain way. You have to now say, well, yeah, this thing works a certain way, which means it's made for a certain purpose, but that's not design. So that would actually be a good, like if we're wanting to what is the definition of design? Or if I'm defining the word design, a plan or drawing produced to show the look and function or workings of a building. That's really not it. Purpose, planning, or intention that exists or is thought to exist behind an action, fact, or material object. And literally, they give you the appearance of design in the universe. So the Oxford Dictionary, uses um, definition of design. Purpose, planning, or intention that exists or is thought to exist behind an action, fact, or material object. The Oxford Dictionary defines design like this. And the example sentence referred to the example sentence they used was about the universe. Right. So that's really cool. Like, again, y'all are saying I'm just typing this in real time. So they used an example sentence and it was about the universe. Creationists aren't the only people who observe the human body's apparent design. So like that's to say that that's just an assertion is come on. No more free samples from Grammarly. So yeah, the Oxford Dictionary defines design like this: purpose, planning, or intention that exists or is thought to exist behind an action, fact, or material object. And the example sentence they used was about the universe. Creationists aren't the only people who observe the human body's apparent design. Saying that the human body isn't designed is a baseless assertion. Like it really is. And so you can you can at least admit, I would think, it looks designed. And that's what I'm when I say apparent design, I'm saying it's clearly designed, but I think atheists will generally say it's apparently designed. Surely you can concede that it looks designed. You might say it's not actually designed, but it looks designed. When people aren't willing to concede that this is where we start getting into, okay, we can't have a real conversation here. And so that's where it's tough. So um there wasn't really anything else here, I don't think. I think I'm done with answering things on this video. And again, you saw I had to actually go in and find that. So I'm probably not going to be back to this video doing any more comments. It looks like the person who uh is probably commenting again because I have this notification. We're at 1 hour and 15 minutes, so I need to get ready to go to bed. So let's answer maybe one more time. This is from responding live to creation. Uh, this is from responding live to comments. So So I'm just like, how about you take a geology class? You earn your living with long videos. Like, I'm making no money off these videos. So one of my previous podcasts was Dr. Don, and we discuss evidence for a young Earth on the order of thousands rather than billions of years. There is no such evidence. The people that claim that are lying or live in your echo chamber. He is not a geologist. Even if he was, that would one of five X. Go look at what Dr. Schweitzer X young earth creationist whose work he lied about. So here's my thing. Like, you, if you say, tell me where the evidence is, and then when I say, hey, here's this video, then you say, basically there is no evidence. So so are we going to talk about the evidence or not? If you're just going to, if you're only going to just say, as soon as I show you some evidence, or as soon as I say, hey, look at the interview with Dr. Don, you say there is no evidence. Why are you on my channel commenting, saying, hey, give me the evidence, give me the evidence? I don't understand. Like, y'all got to help me. I don't understand. Why are you on my channel? And I give you the video where we talk about it, and you're like, no, there's no evidence. I've seen all the lies before. It's like, what? Like, it must be tough. Like, coming on here, and then, so I don't know. So I'm like, still no timestamp. I don't know what you're talking about here. So does that mean you don't know what a timestamp is, or your your new video is pure religion and not science? He doesn't know anything real about the science that shows you two wrong, which is nearly all of it. He does not even know astrophysics. Uh, who who uh have you seen the podcast? Like, I don't, yeah, I don't know what that means. I don't know what timestamp you're asking for. I do you not know what timestamp is? I don't know what timestamp you're asking for. Have you watched the podcast with Dr. DeYoung? Right? So what I'm saying is, I don't know what you're talking about. It's not like you don't know what a timestamp is. It's like, bro, calm down. Please calm down. Right? Like, I don't know what timestamp you were asking for. If you haven't watched the podcast with Dr. Don, you should probably watch that. I think I'm caught up, y'all. I think I'm caught up. So I uh let's well, am I caught up? Now I'm seeing more on here. I'm trying to be done here. Is this, some people say, um what is, the Bible says, some people say, let's make this easier. Provide me a link to a reputable scientific journal or of an academic peer-reviewed article that states that the earth is older than the sun. When some people don't subject their opinion to critical review, their opinions are valid as a 6-year-old ist. Okay. So I hear you. So here's what you're saying. Hey, provide me a link to a reputable scientific journal of an academic peer-reviewed article that states that the earth is older than the sun. Now, again, what are the assumptions though? So because this is what we're getting back to. And so I hear you, and we'll potentially talk about the science behind the age of the sun and the age of the earth. But my point is, if you have people making assumptions, I'm saying, what are the assumptions that are being made? And so this sounds great, but your fundamental issue here is, you assume that because something is a reputable scientific journal, that makes, oh, there we go. Right? Because that's all we need. And again, as someone with a PhD, just because something is peer reviewed doesn't, what does that mean? It means someone, okay, it's peer reviewed. But if you have people who are inherently opposed to anything theistic, then guess what? It's not going to be peer reviewed. That doesn't make it untrue. And so I hear you, but here's what you're going to do. You're going to say, well, it's not subject to critical review. It is subject to critical review. But just because something doesn't get through the peer review process, there are plenty of groundbreaking things that didn't get through the peer review process that later were discovered. It was like, oh yeah, this was amazing. This was great. And so I hear you. I've published before. The peer review process, there are all kinds of issues with it. And so if we now say only peer reviewed work is what we're going to listen to, well, now you have, and again, we're going to address the sun and earth stuff. But my point is, what you're doing is, yes, some people say that some people have estimated that the sun is a certain age and that the earth is more recent. That is what we're saying. That's what reality is. And even if we want to go to a reputable article, even then, what are we talking about here? We're talking about there are a certain set of assumptions. So we will address the earth and sun stuff. It's not really my area. But what I'm saying is, when you say in reality, then you're saying it as if there is something that was observed. There isn't anything that was observed, because we're not talking about something that was observed. So that's not science. That's now, okay, what we're going to do is we have these assumptions, and based on these assumptions, we believe that the sun is this age, and we believe that the earth is this age based on these assumptions. And I'm saying, what are they? So that doesn't, so I'm, what you have to understand is, I don't necessarily care about something being peer reviewed and saying that therefore it must be true. Like, if you knew something about the peer review process, you would understand what I'm saying. As someone who's gone through that process multiple times, you understand. You can have a great paper that has nothing to do with whether or not it's going to be published or not. There's politics involved in it. There's all kinds of things involved in it. And then when you start getting into this, where someone is a believer, particularly in the areas you're talking about, like astrophysics, that often are highly, many of the people are very atheistic, then you can understand it doesn't matter that the science is good. It doesn't have the right conclusion. And so then it doesn't go through the peer review process, or it fails going through the peer review process. It doesn't matter if it's good science or not. So this is what you're going to do. If you have the peer review process, then, and it weeds out all of this good science that points to something different, now you get to say, oh, but that's not good science because peer review. And so I understand that. But what I would say is, it's not that they don't subject their opinion to critical review. It is that there are gatekeepers. And if there are gatekeepers, you can understand why the gatekeepers might not want that kind of evidence put out there. So this is partly why this channel exists, to let you know about some of this evidence. So clearly we need to do an Earth Sun video. And so I might need to start doing videos like that can respond to some of these comments. And so I will get on that, put that on the list. I don't know when I'm going to have time to do this, but it's not that it's going to be that hard to do a video like this, because again, one of the things we will want to do, and so to tell you what that video would look like, let's say we go to this reputable scientific journal that says that the sun is older than the earth or whatever. What am I looking for? I'm looking for the assumptions. What are the assumptions being used? And one of the things I'm going to point out to you is that it's all based on the assumptions. And that if you relax the assumptions, or you do something else with the assumptions, you can come up with something that is completely different. But we need to do a video on it. So we'll do a video on it not down the line. Apparently we need to do a video on it maybe this week. I'm just not sure where I'm going to get that from, but I like this right here, because this is good. Well, provide me a link to a reputable scientific journal that states the earth is older than the sun. Now my thing is, I have a reputable source that says it is. And so the thing is, you don't think that's reputable. So the thing is, you're wanting me to use your standard to show you that the earth is greater than the sun, but your standard is biased. So your standard, let's say peer reviewed, like the idea that you think that peer review is just this like pure, clean process and just the best science gets to the top. If you've done any science, you know that's not true. And so if you haven't, then I understand why you think that that's the way it works, but it's not the way it works. Again, um, so, but we will answer this. Um, excuse just will end there. We'll see you next time.